Hey, it's Jess, and welcome to Becoming Heartstrong. I'm a social entrepreneur, speaker, mother, and business owner, and I'm here because I believe in you, and I want you to live your full potential. My mission with this podcast is simple: to offer you perspectives, tools, and inspiration to help you live with more courage, rebuild after setbacks, and strengthen yourself from the inside out. So each week, I talk to thought leaders, authors, experts, and everyday amazing people who share their stories and outlooks that help you get from where you are today to where you want to be tomorrow. Let's get started. Do you ever feel like you have something great inside of you, but you just aren't sure how to bring it to life? Do you ever need some clarity on how to get from where you are to where you want to be? I'm so excited to share a free guide I created just for you. This tool has helped me in my own times of struggle and doubt. It's called Your Future Self Guide. This mini course includes a future self visualization I recorded, a series of journal questions, and some insights from me about overcoming self-doubt and embracing self-leadership. You can download it for free at jessicalindberg.com/futureself. That's jessicalindberg.com/futureself. Let's get back to the show. Welcome to Becoming Heartstrong. Today, my guest is Bridgett Piacenti. And if you know me, you know Bridgett. She's been part of every season of the podcast. And so I thought it would be fun to bring her in and talk about some of the things that we talk about in our conversations together. When we figured if we're thinking about it, you're probably thinking about it too. Bridgett is a wife and a mother of two, and she's a business owner. She's a renowned international Ashtanga Yoga teacher who's trained with some of the top teachers in her field. But what I love most about Bridgett is that she is a continuous student of life. She's wise and loving, and her students love her for that very reason. They seek her for wisdom and insight, and she just has a really incredible ability to accept others as they are and make them feel fully seen. She's also probably one of the most resourceful people that I know. She can turn anything into something. And that's a really fun part about her. We've been friends for over 20 years, and it's really fun to share a podcast with her each season. Our conversations are always centering for me and remind me of the gifts of this present moment. So welcome, Brid, to the podcast.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. So today, we're going to talk about friendship. We're going to start talking about there because you and I have been friends for such a long time. And we often talk about like women and friendships and what challenges women are facing and what they might be thinking about. And, full disclosure, we are mid-40s, marching towards 50. So we're going to talk about what that looks like in friendship. We're going to touch a little bit on age and motherhood. And also we're going to talk a little bit about some yogic principles that we really think are timely and important. And I think Bridgett can give us like a lot of wisdom there. So let's start. So friendship, we share a lot of reels together on Instagram of things that we're thinking about, and it kind of like jogs our conversations. And so you sent me one from Simon Sinek, and essentially he was talking about a friend of his was really needing some of his time, and he didn't realize it. So they came up together and they decided that they would text each other, "I need 8 minutes." And that would mean that there was something that the other really needed them for. They needed them to be present. And so we were talking about needing 8 minutes. And it kind of got us into a conversation around friendship and around, deep friendship, which I think women desire, but I think a lot of maybe struggle to find. And so I wanted to start there and just get your thoughts on friendship and what makes for a deep friendship and how do you have those in your life?
Yeah. I think, when I saw that, I thought, even for myself personally, wow, you can give that the 8 minutes. And also it's a gift. And I think he says that about how much you feel needed yourself. And oftentimes in this world on how we can exchange communication or lack thereof via, just texting or whatnot. I like to send voice memos. You like to send voice memos. We like to send really long voice memos. And that's one of my favorite ways. But in that sometimes it's hard to say, like, I really need to speak to this person. I really just need to hear your voice. I'm just going through something. It's hard to be vulnerable to, siblings, friends. And so I think that whole, like, I need 8 minutes is sort of like, it says it without saying it, that like you can sort of drop
Mhm.
anything that you're doing. Like, this is a really big deal. This isn't just something, whether it's a missed call and you're like, I'll get back to that person, but you don't for a couple days, or a text you don't return,
Mhm.
as quickly as you'd like. um, like I said, I think it sifts through and makes you feel really, really like, okay, I can be there for that person. And I'm sure 8 minutes is going to turn into a bit longer, but it's just that idea
Mhm.
that I need you. And I think 8 minutes says I
Mhm.
need you without saying I need you. Um,
Mhm.
and I know for myself, like I said, that feeling of often being in many circles, someone who people maybe are coming to, and which I love to be. I need people too, right?
Mhm.
You need people as well. And
Mhm.
so I think that that's really special to be able to, you and I have found that within these voice memos. I think that is our 8 minutes, but our 8 minutes, and we do
Yeah.
try, like we'll even, it's
Yeah.
around 6 now, it's around 7, it's around,
Mhm.
while we're recording the voice memo. But that's really important. And then I think
Mhm.
within that, with the friendships, we've talked about this. The key is the vulnerability
Mhm.
piece and the honesty, and really knowing that you can put forth, you can call somebody out on something, and you can really be direct with um, your relationship and your words. It's kind. I think it's kinder to be that way. And then there is something
Mhm.
that's very real there. I love people that make me question, that make me
Mhm.
stop and think. I don't want to be, just kind of numb walking through. And I think that a lot of women can get into social circles, and that's really what's going on. They're not awake
Right.
in them.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of women's conversations, like I heard this quote, I'm sure you've heard it before too, but somebody's like, intellectual people talk about issues or ideas, and I don't know how they labeled the other group of people, but they talk about other
Right.
people, and I think that there is a lot of that with women. There's a lot of talking about other people or scenarios of life, or even about your kids, or maybe it's your workout, or maybe it's this, but it's very little about something more deep that everyone around the table is thinking about and everyone around the table is dealing with. And I just wonder why that is. I wonder why we do that. You and I don't do
Mm-mm.
that. The people that I'm, especially, close within my life don't do that. There aren't that many people, but we do that in general. And I think if you have a group of, 10 or 12 women around a table, they all are really desirous, at least most of them, of something
Mm-hmm.
deeper. And so it's like, how can we cultivate that, or even help others cultivate that? We don't have to be that for everyone, but I sometimes I wonder if it's like asking questions or that honesty, or because when you put that out there, you also want to know that like that's going to be responded to
Right.
well, not just going to fall flat. So it's like, I guess in some of your experiences, because you're around so many different women all of the time, like how have you observed that, and how have you observed groups of women who do life well
Mm.
together, um, and are able to sort of have those kinds of
Yeah.
conversations?
Well, I think when you're talking about this, I'm thinking of Gabor Mate's, where he talks about longevity
Mm,
versus meaningfulness. And he's like, I hate talking
mm,
about longevity, like bleh. And that's what's out there.
mm,
And he believes
mhm,
really it's a sign of really deep, social anxiety. That so what you
mm,
are going to these tables with is this whole like, how do we live longer? How do we look better? How do we get rid of all these wrinkles? How do we, he's like, yeah, do I wish my hair was a little bit darker? Sure. Or curlier than, as it used to be. Yeah. But the whole idea of sort of the spiritual maturity, or the maybe let's go emotional maturity, that he
mhm,
feels like he has now in his 80s versus when he did have, he says this exactly, like had darker hair, or curlier hair. I think that that's it. We're just afraid socially of what that's going to, the optics, like what is
mm,
that going to look like? So I'm just going to be kind of
mhm,
light about it. And, the world is so heavy. So do I want to be the one that's bringing, what can I bring to the table? So let's just keep it light. Let's just kind of be escapism when we're all together.
mm,
Um, I have been really, really fortunate to be around in circles of women where that isn't the case, you know, and maybe there's some light stuff mixed in there, but that you can have really some deep conversations. I just recently lost a very good friend of mine at 54 from AML. And she was such a light. And, you know, 54, young. And it really, you know, it was beautiful to watch how she did life. It was really beautiful to see how she did death because it was very quick. And I think when you have something like that, then right, people really are like, whoa, wait a second here, you know, and we can go, you know,
It's like a wake
it's
up.
a wake up. And then looking at maybe what are the things that you feel like who are the circles that you are in, and what are you caring about, you know? And yet you can have those big events and have those reflections, but then go on with the rest of your life and every day. You have to be, we go back to like probably a podcast we talked about way back when, right? Or whatnot. There have to be practices every single day to root yourself in these larger concepts of life. Otherwise you will get lost. And so you're not thinking of the meaningfulness of your everyday. Now you're just wanting to like live forever. No one is going to live forever. You're not going to escape that, but it does amaze me at how much folks are putting into that part as though they really are going to escape death. No one has. So, you know, how can we make more meaning in the everyday? And that's kind of circling back to what Gabor was saying.
Well, there's two things that I wanted to ask you that made me think of. First of all, I want to go back to your friend for a second, but the first thing I want to ask about or talk about is that I think, like, you're talking about longevity, but there's also like a fear of aging, I think, in our culture. Like, as much as we say, oh, it's beautiful and it's a privilege to age, and we say all of these things, I don't know that we really believe that. I think that there's so much I read a quote the other day that said, you know, anything before 40 is just rehearsal or practice.
Yes.
And it's so true because, you know, at 35, you think you're old, you know, at 40, you think you're old. And, you know, as we're like mid to upper 40s, it's like, there's so much to learn. And I almost feel like I'm just beginning a part of my life, or some, and maybe it's a comfortability with who you are, but I think that is not manifested in the way that we live as a culture, or the way that we appreciate women as women age, because it's not like the quote unquote perfection of whatever it is supposed to be, but yet we're supposed to be comfortable in our own skin. And I'm just not sure. Those are two such dichotomous messages.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I'm thinking of of someone who I adore, the Suleika Jalad, who's like this whole thing about living with seize the day and live as though it's your last day, right? And that idea that that just it puts this pressure of urgency. If you're living every day as if we're your last, instead of this slowness, you know, it like puts really a lot of emphasis on this hustle, hustle, hustle. So she has decided, going through what she's gone through, and my girlfriend, the same thing as AML, is that she's like, live as though it's your first, you know? And so that has this sort of much more meaningfulness to it. And that it takes away this sense of urgency and rush that I've got to get to something. And yet you might not really know where you're going. And then this whole thing of being able to start over again and again and again, as many times as you need to, that I think allows you to keep some momentum in your life, and understanding that it isn't linear, that, you know, if you need to start again, a concept again, whatever it is again, understanding that has to be, it is, nobody escapes that either. Ask anybody who's, let's just example of writing a book or starting anything, starting a company, if you want to look at it in that, you know, nature. There were many, I'm sure, roadblocks along the way. You know, life is full of conflict. You will not escape conflict. There's disillusionment. There are all things all of the time, and no one is escaping that. But I think in this world of social media, we can get lost in thinking that maybe there are people that do, and I think
Mm.
women really,
Mhm.
really uh, feel that way. And it's like, wow, that
Mhm.
person has really figured it out. And
Yep,
here
they have the
right.
answer.
They
Like, yeah, it's like, take these supplements and lose 20 pounds of hormonal weight tomorrow. It's
exactly
like none of that exists
right. If it's
really.
too good to be true, it's too good to be
It's
true.
too
But
good to be
like for some
true.
reason, we've lost that whole idea and thought if it's too well, if it worked for her, it's going to work for me. Or we're just
Mhm.
saying, well, I'm just willing to try it because I'd rather do that than figure out what it is here within myself.
Mm.
That's the whole thing of like
Mhm.
sitting with being uncomfortable um and that idea of conflict and that it's things are okay right now. So I'll just take that as a win and approach, go at it again another time.
Yeah, it's like not going to that depth. Like when you were talking about Suleika and I saw it, and I actually saw a reel of her saying that the other day. We shared it. I looked back in our
Yeah.
shares and we shared that. The other thing that I think is real, and so she's actually like looking for a depth. And I've thought about that before. It's like, I mean, my oldest son died. My youngest son is, got a significant illness. Like you think about those things and you think about what what would that look like? And I agree with her. I think it's being in the present moment and it's being curious about the day. And it also made me think of Arthur Brooks, who wrote a book with Oprah about how to build a life. And one of the things that he talks about in either it's that book or his previous book, is that he, instead of a bucket list, he takes things
Every
off
year.
every year from his
Hmm.
list because he wants to become more present and less, I want this and this and this and this and this, but I want more depth and more presence and more. And so he takes things off of his list. I think that's very interesting. And I think as I age, I feel somewhat that way. I feel less like I have to do all of these things and more interested in what I like feel called to. It's like I never get to all the places in the world that I want to go to. Like I was thinking about that the other day because like with our son Bodhi, it's really hard to do those things. It's hard to go places. It's hard to get on a plane. Like there's a lot of things. And some days that's really painful to me because both Eric and I are like, we like to go and do things. But I also feel like there's still also a richness in that and an awareness of such presence that like if I don't ever get to do those things in my life, I know that that's also okay because there's other things that I've
Mm,
gained.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that this is also, you know, the conditions and like we were talking about too are always impossible, really, right? If you look at
Mm-hmm.
everything and if you really
Mm-hmm.
dig in on things, and I think that there's something about learning from understanding your present moment versus always wanting to be somewhere else, right? Which is
Mm-hmm.
what you're talking about. It's like, and to have sort of that really deep awareness of not always longing and being in a place of longing, right? If you're always in a place of longing, you're really never right there, which is exactly the example that
True.
you gave, But should you stop dreaming? Should you stop looking at these
Mm-hmm.
places or going, oh, that's beautiful? Or this? No,
Mm-hmm.
you know and I think that again, this is that either or piece that we've talked about in the past, and that this just has to all come with us, and that we have to muddle through
Mm-hmm.
all of it. And I think this brings us to a point of what you spoke of earlier too, with emotional regulation. And something that I love, that one of the people that I do love is Jane Fonda. And she talks about, here's a woman who I grew up watching those tapes with her, doing all the physical, workouts my mom would
Mm-hmm.
do, and with those VHS tapes, right? And so she was this physically fit, right? You would look at that woman and go, wow. But she was like, listen, at that point in my life, I was so emotionally and spiritually void. But she said,
Mm-hmm.
now in her 80s, physically, do I feel fantastic? No, but I wouldn't give it up for how I feel emotionally. Her emotional intelligence and the spiritual intelligence, she's like far outweighs, where she once was with the physical. So it's not to say like, oh, you can't have both. But it's interesting to me, I think, how we equate to this whole like, if you've got it all together, or, appearances, and that, wow, the 20 pounds, lose 20 pounds, or you're doing mobility exercise, whatever fitness thing is going on right now, or even myself with
Mm-hmm.
things I put out into the world, it's like, wow, she can do these handstands. She must X, whatever it is, in my life, isn't true. And so the emotional regulation with that piece is understanding that like both of these things have to be true, in terms of like, I've got these hopes and these dreams and these longings, but I still am very much trying to be right here on a daily basis. Rinse,
Mm-hmm.
repeat. Like this goes with you every single day.
Every
Yeah.
day. So, like, with things in terms of things that go with us every day, you know, like, what are some things that you're learning as you age that you're taking with you, I guess, and that maybe one or two things that you're like, this is empowering to me, or I'm thinking about this a little bit differently. Um, what does that look like for you these
Hmm.
days?
That's a good one. I think, I have built in some practices in my life that I continue to evolve with, that have been some constants that
Mm-hmm.
have morphed and changed. But I definitely feel that they have supported my life, and I can say that now after like over 25 years of being with them, and I'm so grateful. I am grateful to have found a spiritual connection. I grew up with, definitely spirituality more out of religion, growing up Catholic, but then I think I've become more spiritual as time has gone on, and aged, and
Mm-hmm.
and with yoga. But I think I'm along for the ride. I'm open to. I've become much more understanding of, and we've talked about this many times. Uh, Observing the mind, and understanding like feelings. I try to get this, impress this upon my kids, of this idea of like how you can be sad and then how you can be happy 5 minutes later, and that you really
Mm-hmm.
have
Yeah.
to allow all of those into your life, into your body even, and allow them to sort of like course through your veins, but
Mm-hmm.
observe what's going on there, and that they're not going to reside there forever. But if
Ever,
you
yeah.
if you believe they will, and you let this start to believe that, you can get yourself into some spaces for sure that
Mm-hmm.
may allow you feeling stuck, or many other things. And I'm not going to speak for people, but I really ride the gamut. And maybe to the outside world it seems like, I can be really big. I mean, I can sit and meditate and be quiet and still for 20 minutes at this point now, after many years, uh, without much trouble. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not saying that certain days aren't harder than others, but I can do that. That's
Mm-hmm.
within my reach, right? Because I've
Mm-hmm.
worked up towards it over how many years, and I've been with it. I've been interested in seeing that. But I can also be
Mm-hmm.
at one of my kids' lacrosse games and just be cheering louder than any other parent, and just really gregarious. And I I'm
Mhm.
not walking around going, I mean, that's the other part about all of this, is that, we can be many things. We are many
Mhm.
things. And that we have to own
Mhm.
all those pieces. And I think that's really, really helpful. I mean, how would you speak to that too, in terms of like emotional intelligence and
Mhm.
spirituality for yourself, with the experiences in life that you have? Because I think you're such an amazing teacher in that. And I think people look to you so much to
Mm.
go, well, how are you doing this? Oh gosh, I can't remember. Dancing with the Stars, Allison Holker, I think is her last name. Anyway, she talked about,
Oh, yeah.
if people want to know, she goes, if I could write a playbook right, on the things
Mm.
I've experienced and how I've gotten through them. But I can't because I don't know. Like I can't write it all down, or I can't give it to you
Yep.
to say, here, this is how I did it. And we would argue,
Mhm.
well, yeah, you just could write it all down, but it doesn't mean that then you take this and you follow it and it's going to work in your life. So
Mhm.
anyway,
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I continue to learn is about
mm,
acceptance of self and of life as it is. And these are like evolving ideas for me, but one thing that and this, always struggle with is like I have these circumstances currently with my son Bodhi, which are very time consuming, not only mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually consuming, but then it's like I have things like this podcast and some other things that I really enjoy doing. And for so long in my life, I was waiting for there to be a space for these other things. And I'll be very transparent. Like, one thing that I struggle with is consistency. I'm a very consistent person, but a lot of times my life circumstances make consistency a big challenge. And it's a big area of frustration for me. And so, but I think I'm learning about um, being both
mm-hmm.
and owning both, and then giving boundaries in both. And so, because if it's like we wait for the moment, we wait for our kids to be here or gone or available, or we wait for the perfect time for something, and it's just never going to be there. And I think my situation is somewhat extreme, but I also feel like what keeps me able to take care of my son Bodhi and to be the things that I need to be for him is also having these other things in my life. And so part of accepting him is accepting myself, and it's accepting my frustrations, but it's also accepting this other part of me and fighting for her as well. And so, like, one of the things I'm doing with this podcast is I kind of went back to the drawing board a little bit, and I decided to record like 10 or 15 episodes before I release it, so it's May 1st right now, and this probably isn't going to come out till June, because I'm going to set myself up for success so that I have all of these episodes recorded so that I can be both things. So I think that is something that I am learning more about, accepting more, but also learning a tempo of that works
Yeah.
for me. And that's been like years. I mean, literally years. And then it's also being really comfortable with evolution. I sometimes worry that people see me as like this person that can't complete a task. And I feel like that a little bit lately in my how my mind has been, just because there's been so much going on at home. But I think I'm just really intuitively in tune with how I'm evolving. And um, I want to be that person. Like, I want to keep changing and growing. And even things like we're doing with the Heartstrong Collective, like, they're really different this year. And I'm really happy with that. And we're going to be doing some different things that I'm excited about. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a continuous good thing. And so I guess I'm learning to be comfortable with evolving. That's something that I love to embrace, and yet I do worry, and this is just honest, like, what do people think of that change,
Mhm.
And I think that's just a normal thing that we do when we're a creator.
Oh yeah. And who you're creating for. Like we all want to be
Yeah.
received well. We want to be accepted,
Yep.
in our circles and our
Mhm.
spaces that we're working hard at. Like that's just
Mhm.
a human
Right.
need or yearning. And what's
Mhm.
interesting, I always find too with perception, I've always said, to you from the outside, is that that's so opposite. I think people are just like, she rises. She's always,
Mm.
always rising, and so in your from your lens, it's like this, like all this is happening, right? But you keep showing up always, and the product of which you show up and the integrity that you have and how you show up is so consistent. So I want you to
Thank
know
you.
that. I mean, I know
Thank
you and
you.
we have these conversations, and
Mhm.
I mean, we've
Mhm.
said this before. Yes, the extremes. I know the
Mhm.
extremes.
Mhm.
And I mean, I might start crying. The way in which, and that's that's who you are. That's your soul. That is so deep
Mm-hmm.
within you. And that's just this rising, which is why people look to you, go like, I need that playbook, because how do you keep doing
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing and do it in a way that I absolutely want to listen to every word you have to say? And that's rawness, that's honesty, and that's taking us along the ride to say, like, listen, this is hard for me because I want to be consistent. And in your mind, it doesn't seem as consistent. And I would argue, because over the years, I think you have learned that this isn't just this linear path. That's one of your biggest things that you've learned. Because I think growing
Mm-hmm.
up, it was like, well, Jess is going to go out to do this and Jess is going to get it. You and I share in this.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
just
We
like, all I
do.
need is effort. That's it. Discipline,
Yep.
got it. Motivation, got
Yep.
it. I don't
Mm-hmm.
I don't need anyone at my back telling me this, that. No, it was just like, as long as I put in the effort, I'm going to get the thing I wanted in the end. And then life kind of gets in the way and goes, well, wait a second, I put in all the effort, but I'm not getting exactly. So it starts to
Mm-hmm.
shift us a little bit in
Yeah.
how we view this whole short ride called life. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you and I say it all the time. I think people say, oh, it's such a long ride, and we're like, I don't see it as this long ride. And
No.
so I it's interesting on folks who do, and then the folks that don't. So it's sort of like, I need to be in the everyday, because
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many rides I get, how long the
That's
ride
right.
is exactly. But I would say to you, like, that part, how you're showing up is consistent. So
Mm. Well, thank
exactly
you.
is
I'm
it,
glad that
right?
it looks that way.
Yeah.
I'm
You're like,
glad
I'm
it looks
telling you,
that
oh,
way.
it doesn't feel
Yeah,
that way.
it doesn't feel that way. But I think it's like that's something that somebody said to me once in like a DM. They're like, you're so good at trying different things. And so either you can take that as a compliment or you can take that as, oh, they think that I'm always changing things around. But I think for me, it's the creative part of me, but it's also the desire to like continuously get deeper and wider and more aware of life. And I think the nuance of things actually really matters. I think that's one of the things like we're missing in our culture today is nuance. Like there's this side and that side, and somewhere in the middle is probably actually where it's
Right.
at. But people are very afraid of that. But I think that the nuance matters. And like one of the things that like a little thing, that I went back and forth about is like changing the name of this podcast, which I went from the Heartstrong to becoming Heartstrong. And I was like, it's just a little thing. But to me, I was like, it's just not quite where I want it to be. Like, it's kind of like when you're building a practice or doing a painting or decorating, it's like there's something missing. And for me, it was really this idea of like, we're always becoming, like, there's no end. It's this
Right.
continuous process. But I really also wanted to have guests and have people on here that could show up as leaders and sort of lantern holders for people who are like, well, how do you overcome a setback? Or how do you age well? Or how do you mother through this? Or what do you do? Um, because I do think that as much as like there isn't a playbook, there are a lot of people out there who have done a lot of work and have really, I think that's why you and I get the privilege of being in that role in people's life, is because we've cultivated those practices, and like that's really important to us. And it's like I want to set that stage for other people because I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like I guess one of the questions I have for you is like how you've been a yoga practitioner for so long, and you've done all these different things in the community, and you've grown yourself as a practitioner and a teacher, and like are you sensing that you are ready to do something different or more expansive, that like how are you feel like you're expanding yourself maybe professionally as you kind of
Yeah,
age?
I think that's an awesome question too. You know me too. I've never been a real vision board person. I kind of
Mm,
ride a little bit differently that way. I have, because I personally, just for me, have felt like this underpinning of a practice allows me to arrive each day and look at that, and
mm-hmm,
sort of with new eyes. And so
mm-hmm,
I was able to kind of grab that from early on and have a real deep understanding, that I do get another shot at it. My life has supported that. My,
Mm-hmm.
my life, my situation, my circumstances have supported that. I think it's a very important thing to speak to, as well,
Mm-hmm.
because we can set out and say, this is how I want things to be. And then life, and then life happens. Right. And we
Mm-hmm.
never know what's
Mm-hmm.
coming. So, but I just sort of keep putting one foot in front of the other and try to be super observant. So I'm able to get quiet so I can hear, and that I can
Mm-hmm.
sift through a lot of these distractions. Now, that very much is with effort too. Like I'm not going to spend how many hours on social media consume, that's the consumption thing. This is where some of
Mm-hmm.
those yogic practices have come into play. I am responsible for what I bring into this vessel and into this mind. And I'm not saying it's all good stuff, because gosh knows it's not, whether it's food or what, information, but I am very conscious about what I do and where I do that, how much I do that, and recognizing when it's like, okay, this needs a shift. But I'm really pretty quickly on those checks and balances. And I think that comes with this always taking, allowing what comes in and not identifying with it. I just don't identify with it. I just let it kind of come in and out and not get too heavy with it. And so,
Wait, while you're right there, I want to ask you, is that the meditation practice? Like,
yeah,
I think that's really key what you just said. And I don't mean
no,
to interrupt
please
you, but
do.
like I think there's people listening that are like, how do I do that? How do I let something in and out? Because we hang on to things so much. So how do you do that in your
Yeah, I
life?
think it's partly what I was just saying is I don't identify with, I
Mm,
think ideas from identity, and I think that's something
mm,
I think maybe Adam
mhm,
Grant has said as well,
mm,
allows me to keep questioning.
mm,
And because if I'm really, really like attached to how I feel today or my opinion on something, and I'm squeezing it so tightly, then it's almost like my integrity is hit if anyone disagrees.
mm,
Like, I'm okay with not being, I don't need to be right. That's one of the
mhm,
biggest lessons that yoga has given me, because I've spoken about this before. I'm the oldest of 4 kids, and my being, my identity, my integrity was about being intelligent, like very intellectual. As a kid, I loved to read the encyclopedia because I love words. I mean, I wasn't like
mhm,
the best tester, standardized tester in the world, but I worked my butt off for sure to do very well in
mhm,
school. People pleaser, all the things, very type A personality. Again, we go back to that discipline, effort, like motivation. It was always there within me. It coursed through my veins. Nobody needed to say anything to make me more motivated. And so I think that's one of the biggest pieces, is that I'm really willing to keep growing, as are you, and ask these questions and not be so committed to my how I feel about something, and being open to that it's probably going to change, and I hope that it does change, because that's what evolving is about. And that also helps me
mhm,
go through seasons of my life and aging, and recognizing that I'm not going to be stuck in, in 2 feet firmly in the ground on this idea. Um, and that excites me, and I think that's how that is done to me, is this identity piece. And I think that that's hard,
mhm,
because as humans,
mhm,
there is an identification we do need, whether it's with our career or, we do this is human nature.
mhm,
um and so I think it's a very alternative way of thinking, for sure, is
mhm,
to not identify or say, like, I'm defined by this, and this. I am those things. Motherhood, it's not the only thing I am. Partner, it's not the only thing I am. Wife, a friend, it's not the only thing I'm. Daughter, it's not but
mhm,
I'm contributing to all of those in my life, absolutely. But I'm also open to the fact that I've got to kind of, like, struggle with some of those things, and what it looks like, and how I am showing up too in those places in my life,
mhm,
how I am showing up as a mother, as a friend, I'm always thinking about those things,
Hmm.
and letting them come in and not stopping it and being like, I don't want to hear that, you know. And that does, yes, come from being quiet, from
Mhm.
not consuming everything that's going on with the world. I
Mhm.
absolutely protect the self so I can serve others. I don't protect the self. I'm not trying to be delusional that the bigger, greater world is happening. I get that. And I'm not doing it because I think I'm so important. I'm doing it because it's, I have learned it's the only way I can be of servitude, like I can serve others.
Hey there, it's Jess, and we're taking a brief pause to highlight this show's sponsor, the Heartstrong Collective. It's more than just a nonprofit, it's a social movement I founded to inspire people worldwide to embody resilience and grow through challenges. Through the Heartstrong Collective, we're dedicated to empowering caregiving families, investing in the next generation, and leaving the world just a little bit better than we found it. To learn more about our mission and how you can get involved, visit us at theheartstrong.com. So how do you do that? Like, I think protecting yourself is a very hard thing to do
Yeah.
these days, especially when, every other day someone's asking you for something at school or here or there. I mean, that's just life
Mm-hmm.
these days. But then also, even more so, like the content and the ideas that we're bombarded with, like practically speaking, like if somebody's listening and they're like, yes, I need to protect myself. And I love how you said that it's not just about you, it's so you can serve and show up the way you want to. But what are the things that you suggest people may think about if they want to protect their energy or themselves a little bit
Yeah.
more?
I mean, I think these are pieces that are really, really hard. And I think it is not necessarily control the narrative, but in a sense, control the narrative. I think we have to be not only just
Mm.
quiet with ourselves, but we talked about this a little bit, but like how much you do offer up to the world. And that's going to be argued one way or the other, you know, to be just be like, dear diary to the world, here's what's going on. For some people will argue that really helps them, you know, and
Mhm.
that doesn't help me. And I know that
Mhm.
because I've done the work to figure that out. It does not help
Mhm.
my nervous system to allow everybody to know my business, to air my dirty laundry or what have you to everybody, you know. Um, and that
Mhm.
is a little bit of that meditation piece too, of being quiet and when you're still. And that means when it feels like, you know, whether it be, let's say, a practical piece of like being online and you're really being challenged in a way that you're not feeling great about things for yourself. How is scrolling through really going to get you to a better spot? It's not. So understanding
Mhm.
how you can sort of monitor yourself in those ways, which is really, really, really hard to do. I get
Mhm.
that,
It is.
but no one else is going to do it for you, you know. And just
Well,
say
it's
like,
almost
well, this is what everybody does or we all do that isn't the answer. Go ahead.
isn't the, well, I was just saying what you're really talking about is like
Totally.
self-regulation, right? Which is like I call it kind of self-leadership.
I
Like I
like that.
say it to my son Chase about, you know, he's on video games and I'm like, you have 10 minutes when it's 6 o'clock, come upstairs or whatever, and it's 6:30 and he's still there. And I'm like, no, no, no. I'm like, this is learning self-leadership, which means that I'm going to lead myself by knowing this, setting the alarm and coming upstairs or whatever it is. I'm trying to like instill that somewhat into my boys because life will always take your attention. It's always going to ask you for something. How do we lead ourselves so that we can feel good in this world and feel somewhat centered or, take care of business, if you will, eat your dinner before 8 o'clock, whatever it is, I think that's something that I have been thinking a lot about, especially for my kids because they're like in this world which is so
It's so noisy.
noisy.
And I think there's that like, don't let tech be the boss or don't let tech boss you around.
Mhm.
I mean, you know, like
Mhm.
simple things,
It's
you
good.
know, like that where it's not simple, like, right. It's a simple statement. And you're
Mhm.
like, oh yeah, that sounds really fantastic. But at the
Mhm.
same time, like we are being pulled. Again, there's always going to be conflict. There's always going to be, impossible circumstances in life. It's just going to be the
Mhm.
case. And I think that's probably, if you go back to like something I've learned as time has gone on, that's that. I definitely didn't know that.
Mm,
I definitely didn't know that
mm,
growing up. I thought, you just do the right thing. You're a good person. You're a kind person, and you'll kind of, it should be
it works
okay.
out.
You're right. It should be okay.
Hmm.
And so that was another piece that, when you start, uh, when you learn that, you start to go, okay, this is real. Now I've got now this protection piece. Now I have to start to learn how to take care of myself,
Hmm.
because I do really love being out in the world, with others. That feeds me absolutely, but I do need to take care of, and I do need to protect,
Hmm.
myself in order to be good for other people. Um,
Hmm.
and there have to be checks and balances, and in everything that we do. I think that you can't be, I like to really every 6 months in my own, this is another practical piece, in my own, small business and whatnot, um, do just a little bit of a cleanup. Like, what am I doing with what I have right now in terms of my workload and where I'm at? And that's something that I'm able to, being an independent contractor, I can shift. Where are some other
Hmm.
places and spaces I'd like to grow in? So let me put something out there and move toward it. I will be really honest. Right now, I'm sort of coming out of a space of being really overwhelmed. That's not something that
Mm,
I'm used to. And I think,
hmm.
not I think, just a lot of underpinning of things going on in my life, losing a really good friend, grief, right? It shows up
Hmm.
when you have no idea. Um,
Hmm.
and physically feeling that that grief. I have a child going away to college. Rocco's,
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
I wanted to talk to
Rocco's
you
going away
about
to
that.
school.
That's a big
Right.
step.
And I'm on a surface level so excited, of course, of all these things. And I'm sure many
Hmm.
parents.
Hmm.
And I truly, truly am. And he's ready to go and all of those things. But there's probably like an emotional pull in there that
Of course there
that I
is.
didn't realize. Um,
Hmm.
and then so just professionally sort of going, okay, now maybe I'm at my brink of what I can manage. And I think that's important if you're going to be in a role of, working with others, that it is of the utmost for me to make sure that I am, because otherwise it starts to, I think I was feeling this, like, I don't know how much more I can take of anybody else's energy. And when you do energetic work, you
Hmm.
have to figure that out, because
Yes.
it is, I don't, it's careless. It's careless. Then I
Hmm.
shouldn't be in that role anymore. And I really believe that for people. I think that you need to really clean house and look at what you're doing if you're going to be in a role of, whether it taking care of other people, and as moms, that's really hard, right?
It's really hard. Yes, it is.
Um, but being honest with how much you can handle, and when you really can't handle much more,
Hmm.
what are you going to do about it?
Right. And letting there be seasons of that, right? Like
Absolutely.
there are seasons when we have a lot and that feels
Yes.
good. And then we have to, pull back a little bit. I think that that's a really good practical thing. You don't need to be at a constant speed all of the time. It's okay to, let things go like that. But I want to talk because I want to go back to your friend because that we didn't get to that before. And then I want to ask you about, Rocco and graduation. But your friend, like losing a friend, you know, what and obviously grief always in those experiences like so jarring, right? And so we just it's like whoa but for you and that what's like a one or two things that you're like, I'm re-looking at this, or I just want to recheck that in myself. Was there something that you thought about that just sort of jarred you a little bit and you're like, this is resetting me, I need to reset
Hmm.
this?
Um, it's a really, really good question, and it might not be the answer that you're thinking. I guess it was like this really big pull of, like, just women, and just this whole thing of
Mm.
always this like female friendship piece, because
Mhm.
um Susie
Hmm.
is a friend of mine, and just to the background of it is, our boys started, they were in kindergarten together, and that's when I met her.
Mhm.
And they were
Mhm.
not super close in elementary and towards later, even though they both loved to wear bow ties to school. let her son drown. But as they got older, they and then very close, and just a really cool, creative woman. And I think, you know, she was so present, and we got really close even during COVID. And something that I was really loved about her is she was a really passionate person about what she believed, but she started to like soften in and around some things
Hmm.
that she used to be very adamant about how she felt. And I loved watching
Interesting.
that.
With her
Yeah. Which
illness?
said,
Like, did you notice that
yes,
with her
with her in
illness?
this. And
Okay, that's interesting.
she also started to explore a little bit more of spirituality. And it's something
Mm.
she was raised with, but not really. And I loved watching that. And not just because I felt like that was another area that we could connect on. I don't mean that just to be like, this is a currency for me, like, ooh, cool, come to my side, you know, come to the woo woo
Mhm.
side.
Mhm.
Um, but that it was cool to see how that really lit her up, and also how it allowed her to work through some things that she was challenged with.
Hmm.
In her life, she just felt like she could kind of use that as a tool rather than more of the intellect, which she was very smart, very well read, and always kind of looked to that for the answers. And I think she wasn't finding the answers. And you know, that's that whole
Hmm.
thing of like fork in the road, right? And then now it's like, well, now I got
Mhm.
to look elsewhere. Like, this doesn't make sense. Usually the spiritual path starts to, you know, yeah,
Emerge.
yeah,
Yeah.
starts to call you.
Mhm.
And so we really connected on that. And I feel so, I just felt so blessed, and that I was able to be in her life, as you do
Mhm.
with death.
Mhm.
You're just like, it was such a gift. Like, it was such a
Such a
gift
gift.
that I had that with you. Because we all know we're not here forever. So
Mhm. It's like a sacred depth of sharing life
yeah,
and friendship with people. It sounds like that's something that like became more important to you, or that she helped you to like experience in a way that you're like, I want more of that.
absolutely, absolutely. Even
Yeah.
though I've always felt like I have, like, it was just another one of those,
Mhm.
like,
You
to
have.
show up and really validate that, yes,
Mhm.
that's more of exactly that. That's more of what this is about. And
Mhm.
and what I'm looking for in, and what, not so much what I'm looking for too, is what I really hope other women are looking for
Mhm.
and find. That's maybe the answer, Jess. That's the answer.
Well, I think it goes back to like friendship that we were talking about. It's like you also have to be the friend that you
Yes.
want to
You tell your kids
have.
that all the time. I remember that from
Yeah.
you.
It's like you have to sort of, and I think about this sometimes because I have, I have a challenge with getting out of my house sometimes and doing things with people that I want to do, that I want to do them with. But I've thought lately about how important it is to invest in those friendships. And I have a group of friends here that we get, brunch every 4 weeks or 6 weeks. And there's a handful of times I can't go. Like I haven't gone to the last two because I've had Bodhi home, and, you know, that bums me out. But I also like, it's important to invest in those things. And sometimes, like, even though it's hard for me to get there, it's like I want to show up because I want what they have to offer, and I want to give what I have to offer. And I think it's making time for those things. And that becomes challenging when we have jobs and we own businesses and we have kids and there's travel sports. And it's like, I think it's just like lately, and maybe it's age, it's like taking the time and realizing what matters most and then trying to live that out the best that you can. And so I don't know, I think that's what that made me think when you're talking about Susie and friendship. I think it's investing in it. It's making, it's one of our most important investments is other people, and our time, because it's like our non-renewing commodity, right? It's like not, we're not gaining any more of it. So in terms of time, like you mentioned, your oldest is going to be going off to college, and Ethan would be graduating this year if he was here. And so I have lots of friends whose kids are getting ready to do that. And, it's like, wait a second, how did we get here?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how are they this age already? And it is like the blink of an eye. Like when your kids are little, you think it's forever. It is so fast. And so I'm just wondering, like, like, how are you framing this part of your life and this experience? And like, how do you feel about sending your kid out into this crazy world? Like, he's an amazing young man. I mean, he's truly like exceptional. And so it's like something to be so proud of. I just, even we were at the same concert together and he was like so sweet texting me and like, oh, we can come find you. I'm thinking to myself, he that he would even take time to do that. He's like with his friends, you know? But just like, how are you framing his graduation and this time in your life? And yeah, I mean, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, I think, you know, for a moment there was this like, and this might sound so silly, it was like a freedom a little bit. And I'm going to
Mm,
expound on that a little bit in a way that's probably, I don't know, maybe some
mm,
people are like, oh yeah, not freedom
mm.
from him. This is interesting.
Sure.
Freedom
Mm-hmm.
from all of it's like the sort of like these communities and all that comes along with raising a kid in community, which we
Mm-hmm.
know we have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And this is all different communities, whether you choose to homeschool your
Sure.
child, whether you're in, you know, public, private, whatever you've decided to do, send them away, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Anyway, you have to sort of kind of build those, right? Or become part
Yeah,
of
you
them.
do.
That is part of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is one thing that has always been a little bit of a struggle because I tend to be on the fray of things and we go back to this protect. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not doing all the things that it's everyone's telling you you have to do or whatever. I don't want to be on the PTO. I'm not going to be on the PTO. I
Mm-hmm.
will do the things that I feel like I can give of myself within the
Mm-hmm.
confines of my life and how that fits, and that might not look how the next person is doing it, you know. We go back to the protect. I'm not going to stand on the playground at drop off. I need to run and go teach. I'm also not going to stand on the playground and talk about all the negative things we don't like about this school. You know, I really
Mm-hmm.
from very early on have always observe the spaces and recognize I'm not trying to act as though I'm this pious person, but this is a very
Mm-hmm.
real thing. I am not willing, I'm not willing to give up that to be accepted by the masses. I'm just not.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Well, you're not willing to give up your peace, right? I
yes,
mean, it sounds like that,
yes, I
right?
protect my peace
Yeah,
at all costs. And that's hard in community and raising a kid. So there's a part
it
where I'm just
is
like, oh, awesome.
true.
I don't have to deal with
I'm out.
right, to sign up
Yeah,
for this or the da, 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 da. And
Mhm.
that sounds negative, but it's very real.
It's
I've
true.
done my
Yeah.
part. Let's move on.
Mhm.
I think there are some parents that might go, oh, I'm going to really miss that. I'm not one of them.
Mm.
I'm not one of
Mhm.
them. And that might resonate with some people. I'm sure it does. But it also might really be
Mhm.
like, oh, that's really going to, that's hard. You know, for me, I really loved
Mhm.
being in those places and spaces. And I'm not saying there aren't people within those that I made friendships with. But I really
Sure.
struggled with,
Mm.
you know, like not struggled necessarily, but yeah, there's a sense of freedom. There's a sense of like, okay,
Mhm.
cool,
Hmm.
did it, turn the page.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, you're also very comfortable turning the page. I think you're that person. So I think that's part of it. But I also have observed just in women that I've talked to and like people that I know are in a similar situation, a lot of the message that I've heard is, oh my gosh, well, what am I going to do
right,
now? So if it's the kid, maybe it's their oldest who they haven't experienced this before, or it's maybe a younger one. And so maybe they're approaching to being empty
right,
nesters or whatever. Um, and they women and mothers, you know, give themselves to their families, which is an amazing role that we do play. We are like the quarterbacks of our families. I always say that, like the nurturers. We so much is held by us. And yet, like you've done a really good job of cultivating your business and your yoga practice, and you know you're headed to Croatia soon, like to teach. Like you've done, I think that's something that is amazing and something that helps you. And I think that that is something that a lot of women are like, well, now what am I going to do? And for me, that's why fighting for the things that I do is important to me, because there's going to be a day when my other two, Blake and Chase aren't here, and Bodhi may not be here. And so I know that I have to cultivate these other things in my life because I'm a realist and because I know that there are gifts for me to share. So I guess, although I'm not, having a kid graduating, like I think you and I have, and we have different circumstances. I think something that we've both done is cultivated ourselves. I think that's a really important thing if you're listening and your kids are younger to think about. And if your kids are getting ready to graduate or to leave, like thinking about that for yourself and spending some time and investing in yourself to understand like where you want to place yourself in the world, besides just the role of mother.
Yes. And again, that identity piece and that defining and that you're, and you had said it earlier too, not just waiting to like, well, when they graduate or well, when they do that, like you and I know, like we say this all the time. I definitely try to like, if I think about it almost, more than once, like now I got to put action to it because now it keeps coming up. It keeps showing
There's
up.
something there.
And I'm not going to wait for somebody else to knock on my door and offer it to me because that's not going to happen. That's a good lesson that I've learned for sure. So I have to put action to that. And I think that that's been something that I'm good at doing. I not only have the ideas, but then there's action to go with it. And I think that this idea, like you said, of being a realist too, of, maybe you're not projecting so far ahead, but that present, like in the present moment, like that's setting you up for tomorrow, So if you're just sitting here with this idea of like, oh, I want to do that, but there aren't any pieces that you're not planting any seeds, you're not doing any research toward that, you're not starting to kind of, tease that out, start because we go back to this with the podcast here, and like you said, circumstances. And I think one of the podcasts we were going to record, maybe last one or one before, it was like really crazy week for you. And I, and something medically with Bodhi. And it was like, you had no clue, is this going to happen? And you're like, and we're like, we're doing it. We're doing it. We're doing it. We're doing it. And some of that, if you're waiting for when things aren't impossible or the perfect moment, I just don't think that exists. And I think I'm a really great advocate for it. And I really try to put it, I'm a great advocate where I really try to put it into practice. And as do you. And it's not easy. It's definitely not easy because I think we're sometimes looking to get off the hook on that too, because it just might not feel like it's polished and perfect and this and that. That's also something I've learned. I always thought it had to be that it was full, like I wasn't going to fail at this. Like it had to be something that I knew from A to Z could be finished. And I learned to be someone who could be like A to M. Like, okay, I've just got to, just got to get in it. I just got to get in with it and see where this goes. And maybe it takes me into this other direction, but I have to get with it and start it. And so I think that's one of those bigger lessons, so that we aren't these women who are here going, well, now what do I do? And that's not to take judgment. It's just to say, guess what? You own that and start, start today with something that you're thinking about.
And see what happens.
Yes, put some action to it.
Yeah, I think that's good. So, the world is like a crazy place. And so what does it feel like to send your son off to school? And, just thinking of, it's again, May 1st, and there's been protests at colleges all across the United States, and the world is a crazy place. And, I don't know, like, how does that feel? Do you feel, I know you're not a fearful person, but
that's very real.
It's almost like, but it's real, right? Because you're taking this precious being that you have poured your entire life and soul and everything into, and you're offering them, in a sense, to the world, which is sort of a scary thing to be placing them in. And it's important. I mean, it's so important to release your children to the world. I'm not, we both believe that, and to let them become who they're created to be, and to, face resistance and challenge and all of those things. But there's some bigger existential things, I think, in the world right now. So how does that feel as a mother in this time?
Yeah, I think I just have to go with the idea that you were saying too. I try not to have too much anticipatory anxiety about anything. Not to say
Mm-hmm.
that then when it's in, because again, trying to be in that moment. So I try not to borrow
Mm-hmm.
trouble, as my noni always would say, even though my noni
Mm-hmm.
borrows
I love
trouble
that.
all of the time. So it was a very funny. I love that that was her mantra. I was like, "What's your mantra?"
Yeah,
Because it's very real in your own life, like
that's what you do.
So, anywho, that he is mine, but he's not mine, and
Mm-hmm.
I have a God bearing feeling of like this is he was not brought into the world to be with me forever.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a vehicle for his life. So as you said, be out in the world. And it's going to always be a scary thing. Someone just said just today, actually, in studio, I thought it was so profound. Like they're not always with you, but they're always in your mind. They're always on your mind.
Mm-hmm.
So that physical presence will no longer
Mm-hmm.
be there in the same way. But that doesn't mean that mentally that they're not with you all the time. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think to have and bring a child into the world is to forever have wear your heart in your sleeve or outside of the saying
Mm-hmm.
goes. Um, you carry that with you. Uh, but
Mm-hmm.
that's life, and
That's
and
life.
this is the world that they are in.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
I'm a
right.
big advocate of like again, even with this technology stuff, we can't go and harken back to like, well, when we were kids. Well, this isn't how it is for them, so we do
Right.
need to arm them with the tools to
Mm-hmm.
be in this world, to not only survive but thrive,
Thrive.
right? And I think one
Mm-hmm.
of those ways is for sure to, yeah, this is, you hope for the best, of course, and that always isn't going to be the case. And I can't control what I cannot control. And I have to remind myself that every day, for sure. And I just think that to me, it makes sense. This makes sense with him as to where he is in his life. And that he knows he can always come back home, and there is family, and but I hope that he within himself too, that he's ready to go. That that you won't have all the answers. You're never going to have all the answers because we don't have all the answers. You know?
Right. We
Um,
don't.
so I
Yeah.
think that that's important as well. But that you need to go out and make some mistakes in the world, and you need to figure out how to get yourself out of them. I know you felt the same way. That was
Mm-hmm.
such a freeing thing. Just the smallest of things to go out and go, okay, I figured out how to take, moving to a city, coming from a town of
Mm-hmm.
5,000 people. I figured out how to take the
Mm-hmm.
L and get myself where I needed to go. Now, granted,
Right.
I rode it all the way down to the very end on the south side of Chicago, Chicago the first time I did it. I never did that again. This is just
Right.
how it
Right.
goes. Life
How
is
it goes.
trial and error.
There
And
is.
and you hope that you can come back and try again, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't have that control on whether or not I do, so or someone does. And so I just think you got to keep digging in on life, and that's the best we can do. I don't know if that even answers it, or I talked all the way around it, but that's kind of the headspace I'm in right
That's where you're at. No, I think that's good. And I think also, it also gives it's made me think it gives context a bit to the importance of the investments that we make in our kids while they're under our
now.
roof. And like one of the things I was thinking about is the whole technology thing. There's a new book out called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, and he's talking about some different things he's advocating for around technology. And one of the things that we do in our house is we have a docking station in the kitchen, so everybody's got to leave their phone there at
Mhm.
night. And it's a practice that I've just done with my kids. I mean, mine goes in my bathroom because I use it as my alarm, but that's just something that I've done with them. And my 15-year-old has slowly started to like fall asleep with his phone in his room, and so, and I'm not worried about anything, and he's a great kid and he makes good choices, but it's more like while he's here in my house, like I want him to have that practice, because it's just once you do something, it goes back to like the practice, right? Then you're like, okay, technology shouldn't control my life. I should set it aside sometimes. Like I want him to have that in his mind. And so I don't know, I guess this idea of this graduation piece, which is something like I'm thinking about because I'm not doing it, but it's something I would be. It's also informed kind of how I'm thinking about my kiddos that are here. So I don't know. It's just something that I think that's good, right? Because we kind of just follow different things, and things help us to reframe like where we're at, I think, in the world a bit.
Yeah, and I think along those same lines, like we can, we can do the modeling and we can impress upon
Mm-hmm.
them what we think is best for them or best for their
Mm-hmm.
health or this, that, and the other. But ultimately, they will have to. I say that all the time. You are not
Mm-hmm.
going to love, you definitely are going to love all the things I'm saying or the controls I'm putting on this here. But at some point, you get to do this for yourself, right?
Yep.
At some point, you
Yeah.
do. It's not forever, and you're going to might not make the same, probably not make the same choices I'm making. But again, understand that there is on the other side of this a point at which I am no longer in this in that way. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's, you
Mm-hmm.
know, very freeing for them to know that. And also maybe it lessens this sort of like grip that it might feel like for kids at a time. And that, this whole thing of like, they've got my best interest at heart. And yet at the end of the day, I might not think the same way. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
telling them, guess what? I already know that, and that's
Mm-hmm.
okay too. And
And that's
I didn't
okay. Yeah.
maybe grow up feeling that way necessarily. And I think I just mean our generation. It was sort of like, we're
Mm-hmm.
telling you what to
Yeah.
do. And really the answer is just because this is how it is. And there wasn't this expansion or this buoyancy to feel as though anything could kind of shift in that. And I didn't love
Mm-hmm.
that. I didn't love
Mm-hmm.
that. And so I feel like whether that's right or wrong or just how I'm doing it for my kids, I just want them to understand that like it's a big world. You're going to get out there. We did our best here, hopefully with you. There's no rule book for it or manual rather. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a hell of a lot of love,
Yep.
and it's coming out of love, and that's the thing that you can always come back to. And
Mm-hmm.
I want there to be
Yeah.
so much self-love. That's why I love the protect
Mm-hmm.
thyself, so you can be out in the world. And I just believe that's our biggest defense. And it's not, again,
Mm-hmm.
to say like I feel like I am better than anyone else when we talk about this world too, and being like we're so self-centered or it's all about the self. And you and I have talked about this. It's all about the self to get to be in community. You can't
Mm-hmm.
really be in community, I think, in a healthy way if you aren't
Mm-hmm.
taking care of the self. So they
Of the
yeah, they
self.
work together. It's not just
Yeah, and you need the community. I just want to share this because this just happened today and it made me think of
yeah.
this. So after Ethan died, the community that we were part of bought us this tree, and it's in our backyard and it flowers every spring and it's beautiful. It's this magenta pink tree. And I love when it flowers and it stays for such a short time, but I always think about all the families and what a gift it is to have shared experiences, good and difficult ones. So I went out there the other day and I snipped some flowers off of it. And I was like, these are so beautiful. I'm going to put them in my kitchen. So I brought them in. And today, which is like 2 days since I brought it in the house, I noticed that the magenta color is now like fading into like a pale pink.
Mm,
And I'm like, that's so interesting. And I just had the reflection, like when you take yourself out of community, you don't flourish as well. And it's like the color of these branches is not as beautiful because they're separated
from the
from the
tree.
tree that they were part of. That's what made it beautiful. And so I think, and extrapolating out to whatever, but even to our kids, it's like we always have that, our love is sort of that connection to them that allows them to flourish and allows them to grow and allows them to blossom into the world. And you know, not every child has that gift, but our kids are fortunate enough to have that. And so it's like things are going to be okay. They're going to be
Yep.
fine.
Yep.
Um, so
As
I don't
to what
know.
level, and that they're going out into the world to become who they're to become and not to become
That's right.
you, you know,
Not to be us.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that there's, yeah, the freedom of knowing
Yeah.
that, and
Mm-hmm.
is a much different way, I think,
Mm-hmm.
of doing this parenting thing than maybe
Yeah.
generations prior to, you know.
Yeah. It's the awareness that, like you
We're
said.
doing all the work. We're trying to get in and
Yeah.
get really honest with ourselves instead of throwing
Mm-hmm.
things under the rug, and just saying, well, this is just
Mm-hmm.
how it is, you know. And so these kids are coming out in with a different message than I think even with, you know, our generation, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We keep trying to
We
do
keep trying to
better.
do better.
So I just wanted to ask you about one more thing before we leave, because you always have such good wisdom around yogic principles, which I feel like we could do a whole podcast on them. But you sent me a reel. It was a woman, and she was talking about how you can be content in life, but not
Mm-hmm.
pleased. And that really resonated with me because that's the person I want to be. Because I feel unpleased too much of the time, probably. And I want to be content. And I am, but I do struggle with that. And so I'm wondering if you, and I think a lot of people probably do, which is why I'm bringing it up. So I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about that Buddhist principle, and maybe, and I think it goes back to the things that we've already talked about, you know, protection of self and meditation and taking the time, but like just frame that for us a little bit for those listening. Who, how can we be content but not, maybe not pleased?
Right. I think, you know, and she talked about, this Buddhist teacher is in the real you're referencing to, is the common thought that plagues humans, right, is that the belief that happiness is contingent upon fulfilling your current desires. And I think this goes back to a
Mm,
lot of what we're fed with, also social media, too, at being sort of always lacking. There, it always
mm,
seems right. So it's like, if you're always in
mm-hmm,
this
so true.
state of not being enough, how can you be content?
Mm,
So it is really a, about this idea that obviously contentment doesn't equal happiness, or happiness doesn't equal uh, not being pleased, and contentment don't, you know, go hand in hand
mm,
here, but that you can be not fulfilled maybe, or not pleased, right, with maybe something, the outcome of something, but that there still can reside in you this sense of still being whole, not being lesser than,
mm-hmm,
not being lacking. I think that's, it's
mm.
sort, it's like a little
I
bit
think the lack is the
semantics,
big one. Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm,
Because if you equate it to this, like, well, if I'm not, didn't get this, then it means I'm not this, you know, you're going to be in
mm-hmm,
this sense of, or this place of, well, I am not whole. So we go back to
mm,
this idea that we are intrinsically whole, right? And it's like, who are you before the world got a hold of you? And if you can
mm,
come back to those places, however it is that you are able to do that, whether it's, you know, through meditation, through prayer, through being quiet for 2 minutes of your day, but also just knowing this, or
mm-hmm,
not maybe knowing it, but understanding that it's a possibility. Let's put it out like
mm-hmm,
that, right? Because maybe you're like, I don't really
mm-hmm,
believe what you're saying there, right? Because I get it. But knowing that it's a possibility, that it that you
mm-hmm,
can be in that place and space. And I really think that it is how you create, it comes back to the narrative. It's like, well, if I didn't do this, then I'm telling myself I'm not successful at something. Let's talk about just what you talked about earlier. Like, you're always, someone mentioned to you, like, I love how you're always, you know, trying new things, right? They're putting that out there as a positive, as like this. I
mm-hmm.
love that. That's inspirational for me. That's motivating for me to try new things. You receive it as maybe, do they think that I, you know, I don't finish things, right? Then
Mm-hmm.
that's why I'm trying new things. So it's interesting how we only are responsible for sort of like what we put out into the world, and like how it's received is how it's received, because that's how that person
Yeah.
is taking it in from their own personal experiences. And I think so much is like, again, this deep social anxiety that, like, a, we're not saying the right thing, or what do I need to say to be accepted? And everything is outside. That's all external. So it has to come from within. Like there has to be this place that you keep coming back to that's like, I am intrinsically whole. I am I'm a good person. I can get confused by a lot of this that's out there. And the more, if you find yourself someone who really struggles with that all of the time, you need to check in with what you're taking in, with the communities that you're sitting in, with the spaces that you are inviting in, with what you're eating, what you're drinking, what you're reading. I believe so much in consumption, and consumption comes every day through all of the senses. And you have to
Yeah.
look at those and be really honest with how you're spending your time, because you can be doing a lot. You can be spending a lot of time in spaces that think you are lesser than, and that is not going to do you any good.
And then there's no
There's
contentment,
none.
right?
Now you can't be content at
Yeah.
all. When in fact, isn't that interesting, right? We bring up examples like this is an easy one. If you're really feeling great in your own life and the things that are going on, and then you go on to social media and you see somebody just went to
Yeah.
somewhere, and you're like, immediately
Yeah.
you just drop,
Yep. Yep.
and it's like the wind is
Hmm.
just out of your sails. So if you know you're in that headspace, right? Just stay in your beautiful life that day.
Right.
Maybe don't go
Right.
to it, and just ride that wave of loving on yourself. I promise you there'll be another day that you can look to that and also be inspired by that person's trip. Oh
Right.
wow, and have that idea that like, I'm happy, I even could say I'm happy for that person and I would really love to go there. And that's it. It stops there. It's not like, oh,
Stops there.
but now we start to downward spiral. We're like, don't make enough to go there. And my job really sucks. And so
Yeah. Yes.
there's the protection piece also,
Mhm.
I think we kid ourselves with the social media piece to be that it's all that inspiring. And that's probably another,
Mm.
podcast topic. But
Mhm.
I argue, yes, it is, and it can be, but I
Hmm.
think you have to check yourself on whether or not you're able to receive it in that way. And if you're not, I'm not sure it is. I think it can be
Mhm.
it's weaponized. I mean, it
Mhm.
really can be something that isn't good for you. You know.
But I think that brings us back to what we've been talking about, which is like chasing authenticity and vulnerability in your real life and seeking friendships and spending and investing in time with people and cultivating your center and your
Yeah.
peace in your life, because it's almost like you need all of those things as a shield of sorts. So when you go out into the world, it's something you can, it's already there. You're not looking to get that from, the person you're following on Instagram who's just spent the last, 3 days making a minute reel to make it look perfect. It's like, I'm not putting that down, but that's what people do. And so when we're so in our life, we can be inspired. I think when
Mhm.
we're not really in our life is when the lack and the longing comes in when we look at other things. And so it's like, it's that contentment. It's like seeking that contentment, which I think is something that like you and I are both on a quest to do in our lives, and um I think that that's something that we want for other people as well. Like we want them to feel that and to spend time seeking that for themselves.
Absolutely. And the sitting in spaces like we said, and friendships where
Mhm.
you can be very
Mhm.
honest, you can be very direct, and you can receive that information um,
Mhm.
with an open mind, knowing that that comes from love, and
Mhm.
um, a deep seated, yeah, love, and that someone cares for you in the same way that you want to care for yourself. you know
That's
Yeah, and I
beautiful.
think that those are
Yeah.
real friendships, and that's what we're looking for. And if you are looking to the outside for everything external, this validation piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
You'll end up empty, coming up empty
Mm-hmm.
or always feeling lesser than.
Mm. That's so
Yeah.
true. That's so good. Thanks, Brid. This was
Yeah.
fun. I feel like there's so many other things we could talk about, but I love this, and I hope that people listening really, think about how they're spending their time in their life and how they're investing themselves and really investing in people that they want to be around and people that they want to be part of and making their life richer and wider and deeper. And I think that's really what makes life worth living and makes it exciting. And yeah, so I'm so glad I get to share it with you. This was fun.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to Becoming Heartstrong. I hope you found today's episode inspiring and applicable to your life. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share it with a friend. Before I go, this is just a quick reminder that I believe in you, and I believe that you too have the ability to become heartstrong. I'll chat with you soon.